The most fortified city in the world fell in just 53 days. Not because its walls were weak, not because its defenders gave up, but because the world around it had fundamentally changed and the city had not changed with it. That single truth reshaped two continents, redirected global trade, and set in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of human history forever. Constantinople sat at one of the most extraordinary geographic positions ever occupied by a human settlement. To the west lay Europe, to the east lay Asia, and between them stretched the Bosporus Strait, a narrow ribbon of water connecting the Black Sea to the north with the Mediterranean Sea to the south. Every ship, every merchant caravan, every army attempting to move between continents had to pass through this single choke point. Control the strait, and you controlled the flow of wealth between the Eastern and Western worlds. Constantinople did not merely control it. It fortified it with a ferocity that made the city appear almost supernatural in its permanence. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople served as the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, a direct continuation of Rome itself. Massive stone walls stretched for miles around the city, built in 3 layers deep, with towers rising high above them. On one side lay open sea. On another sat a narrow harbour known as the Golden Horn, and across that harbour hung a literal iron chain, stretched wide enough to block any enemy vessel from entering. The system worked. Persians came and failed. Arabs came and failed. Bulgars, Crusaders, and countless others launched sieges that crumbled against those walls. Even when the Western Roman Empire collapsed entirely, Constantinople remained standing. Rich, powerful, and seemingly untouchable, the city looked eternal to everyone who gazed upon it. Its walls, they weakened slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until the moment arrives when the weakness can no longer be hidden. By the 1400s, Constantinople was no longer what it had once been. On any map of the region, the contrast was devastating. Where the Byzantine Empire had once stretched across vast territories surrounding the Mediterranean, it had now shrunk to little more than the city itself and a handful of scattered, disconnected territories. To the east, a new and rapidly expanding power had emerged. The Ottoman Empire had already absorbed most of the surrounding land, encircling Constantinople completely, cutting it off from reinforcements and escape routes alike. The city was surrounded, isolated, and deeply vulnerable. Its one remaining advantage was the same thing that had saved it for centuries. It was something entirely new, something Constantinople had never encountered in all its centuries of survival. And warfare had changed in ways that no stone barrier could fully answer. Gunpowder had arrived in Europe and the surrounding regions, and cannons were no longer small, portable weapons. They had grown into enormous machines of destruction, capable of hurling massive stone projectiles across great distances. For the first time in history, walls could be broken from far away, without ever placing a soldier within reach of a defender's sword. The Ottomans understood this completely. They commissioned the construction of some of the largest cannons the world had ever seen, weapons so enormous they required dozens of oxen to drag them into position, and so powerful that their firing could shake the ground beneath the feet of soldiers standing hundreds of meters away. This was not a traditional siege. The city was surrounded on every side with no remaining barrier between it and the forces closing in. Ottoman forces surrounded the city from every direction. On land, the routes were blocked completely. At sea, Ottoman naval power controlled the surrounding waters. The cannons were positioned and then they fired. The walls trembled. Stone cracked. Sections that had stood untouched for centuries began to fracture and collapse. And yet the city held. For weeks, defenders worked through the night repairing damage, rebuilding broken sections, and fighting with a determination born from the knowledge that no relief was coming. The final assault came with relentless force. Cannons fired without pause, walls collapsed in sections. Gaps opened wide enough for soldiers to pour through. Wave after wave of Ottoman forces rushed the breaches, while exhausted defenders, outnumbered and outmatched, fought to hold every inch of ground. The gates were breached. The city was flooded with soldiers moving street by street, building by building. After more than 1,000 years of continuous existence as one of the most powerful cities on earth, Constantinople fell. The Byzantine Empire, the last living thread connecting the ancient world of Rome to the medieval present, ceased to exist in a single day. The consequences spread far beyond the city itself. Constantinople became the new center of the Ottoman Empire, renamed and rebuilt as the capital of a power that now controlled the critical passage between Europe and Asia. Trade between the two continents, which had flowed through this region for centuries, was now under the authority of a single empire. European kingdoms that had depended on those trade routes began to panic. The familiar paths to Asian spices, silks and goods were now controlled by a power with its own interests and its own terms. The search for alternative routes became urgent, almost desperate. That search drove European sailors westward into unknown oceans, southward around the tip of Africa, and eventually across an entire ocean that most Europeans did not even know existed. The fall of Constantinople did not merely end an empire. It pushed the world toward an age of exploration that would connect continents previously unknown to one another and reshape the entire global order in ways that are still visible today. Not just a city, a hinge point in history, the place where two continents met, where ancient Rome finally ended, and where the modern world quietly began, the gateway between two continents. The city that stood for 1,000 years through sieges, plagues, political collapse, and the fall of the empire that had originally built it. Constantinople was all of these things simultaneously, and its fall was not simply a military event. It was a turning point, a moment when one chapter of human history closed and another opened with extraordinary speed. The walls that had protected it were not weak. The people who defended it were not cowardly. But the world had changed around them, and the city that had once been perfectly positioned to control that world found itself unable to adapt in time. That is the story of Constantinople.